Jupiter in the fifth house, joyful excess. Welcome to Jupiter in the fifth house in synastry. In this overlay, we explore what happens when one person's Jupiter falls into another person's fifth house, the house of romance, pleasure, creativity, children, and the part of life lived for its own delight rather than for any practical necessity. This overlay does not need to be coaxed into expressing itself. Where Jupiter in the fourth house works slowly and privately on the foundation, Jupiter in the fifth house tends to be immediately, almost unmistakably felt. In laughter that comes easily, in a sense of romantic possibility that arrives early and announces itself without subtlety, in a quality of fun that makes the relationship feel, from very near its beginning, like something worth celebrating. Where Jupiter in the second expands resource and Jupiter in the fourth expands foundation, Jupiter in the fifth expands delight itself. And of all the houses Jupiter touches in synastry, this is among the most purely, immediately pleasurable. Jupiter's essential nature governs the shape of this overlay just as it governs every other, and here that nature finds genuinely fertile ground. Jupiter operates through expansion, through increase, through the widening of what feels possible, and the fifth house is, by its very nature, a house concerned with more rather than enough. More pleasure, more romance, more creative self-expression, more of whatever makes life feel worth living beyond its bare necessities. Where Jupiter's expansiveness can feel slightly out of place in houses governed by precision or restraint, here it is almost entirely at home. The fifth house does not ask Jupiter to be careful. It asks Jupiter to be generous, and Jupiter, true to its nature, obliges. The fifth house, in traditional astrology, governs joy in its most direct and least complicated sense. Romance, courtship, children, creative output, games, celebration, and the pursuit of pleasure as a legitimate end in itself, rather than a means to anything else. It is, in the Hellenistic house of joy doctrine, the house in which Venus herself rejoices, reflecting the natural sympathy between the fifth house's concerns and Venus's domain of beauty, attraction, and delight. Jupiter holds no formal dignity here, no domicile, no exaltation, and the joy in question belongs properly to Venus rather than to Jupiter, a distinction worth making plainly rather than allowing the two benefics to blur together simply because they share a house of evident pleasure. What Jupiter brings to the fifth house, it brings as a benefic visiting Venus's own joyful terrain, and the combination, even without Jupiter holding any formal claim to the house, tends to produce something unusually buoyant. From the Jupiter person's perspective, the house person's capacity for pleasure, play, and romantic expression is often experienced as something to be actively encouraged and amplified. The Jupiter person may find themselves drawn to whatever the house person creates, performs, or simply enjoys, and inclined to respond with enthusiasm that exceeds polite appreciation. There is frequently a generosity of spirit here that shows up as romantic gesture, the Jupiter person inclined toward grand rather than modest expressions of affection, toward celebration rather than understatement, toward treating courtship itself as an occasion worth making memorable. From the house person's perspective, the experience is often one of feeling unusually free to enjoy themselves. The fifth house is where a person is least burdened by obligation and most simply themselves in pursuit of what delights them, and Jupiter's presence there tends to amplify that freedom rather than constrain it. The house person may find their creative output expanding under this overlay, their romantic confidence rising, their sense of what is permissible in the pursuit of pleasure widening considerably. There is often a felt sense of being romantically pursued with real enthusiasm, of one's creative or playful instincts being met not with mild encouragement but with genuine, expansive delight. At its most constructive, this overlay produces a relationship marked by real romantic warmth and creative flourishing. Courtship under Jupiter in the fifth tends to be generous and memorable rather than cautious. Grand gestures, shared adventures, a mutual willingness to treat the relationship itself as something worth celebrating rather than merely maintaining. Creative collaboration often thrives here as well, with both people finding that their artistic or playful instincts are drawn out and taken further in each other's company than either might have managed alone. Where children factor into the relationship, this overlay frequently brings a particular warmth and generosity to that domain as well. A household in which play and creative expression are treated as genuinely important rather than incidental. And yet, the fifth house's particular territory gives Jupiter's characteristic excess a recognizable and specific shape. Where Jupiter's inflation in the second house distorts material expectation, and in the fourth house distorts domestic foundation, in the fifth house it distorts pleasure itself, producing romance and indulgence that exceed what the relationship's actual circumstances can sustain. This is, of all the houses, perhaps the one where Jupiter's excess is most easily mistaken for genuine abundance, because the excess in question is so enjoyable while it is occurring. Romantic gestures can become grander than the relationship's foundation has actually earned. Pleasure-seeking, whether through spending, through indulgence, through the pursuit of novelty and excitement, can accelerate past what is either financially or emotionally sustainable, justified in the moment by Jupiter's characteristic conviction that more is simply better. There is also a pattern worth naming around romantic seriousness. Jupiter's expansiveness in the fifth house can produce a courtship that feels significant and fated very early, sometimes before the relationship has accumulated the substance to support that feeling. The fifth house deals in romance rather than commitment in the more binding structural sense. That territory belongs more properly to the seventh house. And a relationship that lives primarily in this overlay's register risks mistaking the intensity of mutual delight for a depth of foundation that has not, in fact, been built. Two people can feel entirely swept up in each other's company and discover, once the relationship moves into more demanding territory, that the romance was real, but the readiness for what comes after romance was assumed rather than tested. A further risk concerns indulgence without consequence, or rather, indulgence with consequences that Jupiter's optimism makes easy to overlook in the moment. The fifth house's appetite for pleasure, amplified by Jupiter, can produce patterns of overspending on courtship and leisure, of treating celebration as a constant rather than an occasion, of a shared taste for excess that neither person feels especially motivated to moderate, since moderating pleasure runs directly against the overlay's most basic instinct. Where children are part of the picture, this same expansiveness, if unchecked, can tip into overindulgence, generosity toward children that substitutes for the more demanding work of structure and limit. The distinction between this overlay's nourishing and inflating expressions tends to rest on whether the pleasure it generates is matched by some genuine capacity for restraint elsewhere in the relationship. Jupiter expands the felt worth of delight. It does not, on its own, supply the discipline to know when enough has become too much. When the Jupiter person's romantic and creative generosity is paired with honest attention to what the relationship can actually sustain, financially, emotionally, practically, this overlay produces a genuinely joyful partnership. When that attention is absent, the same generosity can produce a relationship that is tremendously enjoyable in the moment and considerably less stable than its evident delight would suggest. At its highest expression, Jupiter in the fifth house creates a relationship of real romantic warmth, creative flourishing, and shared delight, courtship that feels generous and memorable, play that is taken seriously as a source of genuine joy rather than dismissed as frivolous. The Jupiter person's instinct toward romantic and creative generosity finds, in the house person, a willing and responsive partner in pleasure. The house person, in turn, gives the Jupiter person's expansive instincts a context in which they become genuinely celebratory rather than merely indulgent. When balanced, Jupiter in the fifth house creates romantic generosity, creative expansion, genuine shared joy, and a relationship that treats delight as something worth cultivating deliberately. When imbalanced, it can produce romantic excess unmatched by foundation, indulgence without restraint, and a courtship so pleasurable that the more demanding question of long-term readiness goes unasked. At its core, this overlay is about the experience of feeling more joyful, more romantically alive, more creatively free in someone else's company than one perhaps manages elsewhere. The question it poses, and that only the two people involved can answer, is whether that joy is being built on a foundation capable of holding it, or whether it is, for now, simply the delightful and unexamined feeling of pleasure for its own sake.
This was Jupiter in the 5th house in Synastry overlays. Thank you for listening. Next, Jupiter in the 6th house.